If you don't submit to control, if you're a radical, you're less likely to be loved. You're not fitting in with society. You're viewed as an outsider. So there's a lot of social prohibitions about the outsider and the person who's going to upset things.
From the time we're very young, we're taught to, worship authority basically because that's our key to survival as young children. But as adults, we never go through the rites of passage that tell us how to methodically think for ourselves, and thus we're always in a state of extended adolescence.
Well, we take all this stuff, whether it's the television or it's the enculturation, the schoolyards, the teachers, we take this whole system, we put it into our unconscious mind. And it is the GIGO that comes out, garbage in, garbage out. We simply, in that computer language, have harnessed our own power by accepting all these beliefs as though they are factual, whether it's the flat earth of Columbus, or it's the idea that I'm not good enough to be or to do something I've dreamed to do.
To the degree that the individual loses a sense of what freedom really means for himself, mind control is working. This is the constant battle and the struggle. What does my freedom mean to me? What is it? How deep does it go? How far-reaching is it?
Individuals come already with their rights. They're born with their rights. They're inherent. They're hardwired. They're hardware.
It's tragic. They've lost their sense of the importance of the individual. Each individual. We're not animals. We're individuals. We're created in the image of God.
And so what you have is everybody's born into this control structure. Everybody's born into authority. Everyone's born into this situation. But just because you have an authority making decisions for you at some point when you're very young, too young to take care of yourself, doesn't mean you should always cater to authority your whole life.
Fatalism, defeatism, what Bob Marley called mental slavery. That's a huge thing that he would sing about. How do we emancipate ourselves from mental slavery? Have we moved to that point of such slavery that we're too far gone?
And just kind of letting it all flow by and being apathetic about it just gets you in a position of being controlled.
There are some people that don't care. There are some people that don't know and don't want to know. It is very frightening. If you really look at it, you would be left with the understanding that you were obligated to do something about it. And, people work really hard every day and they just want to relax and enjoy their life.
We have established a framework for the most part, works pretty good. People enter into this contract with society. That contract allows them to follow certain rules and expect certain returns on their investment of working within the framework of the contract.
Human beings form habits. At some point in our lives, many of us realize that the lives we are living are not those which we have imagined, but rather lives reflecting others' imaginations, as if we have been unwitting actors in someone else's script. Are we acting out the artificial roles created by others who have successfully harnessed our minds through our habits? To answer that question, one must first learn how the minds of individuals can be harnessed by systems of psychological control. Are the habits reflected by human beings in direct conflict with their needs to survive and thrive in this world? The enormous implications deter many of us from asking these simple questions and finding answers relevant to our daily lives.
If we don't resist all of the different information that comes our way and weigh it and use our own mind instead of what somebody else wants us to think, eventually society would become nothing more than automatons, robots.
The establishment it's protected itself unless you submit to the saturation, indoctrination, and adopt all its values. You can't get in.
Everyone needs to find out and really think about it. What is going too far? Because all of this is happening so fast, you need to be ahead of the game. They're ahead of the game.
Humans subjugate themselves to control because they're born into it. And the tyrants and the social engineers know how to incrementally begin to slowly ratchet up the manipulation, the domination, the oppression, so that people never really recognize it coming. It's the old analogy of the frog in the boiling pot. You throw a frog into a boiling pot, folks in Louisiana will tell you this, a bullfrog, he'll jump out. But if you put him in a cold pot, turn it on simmer, heat it up slow, he'll boil, and he'll never see it coming.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with group collectivism, and like, go back to John Dewey, you know, he hated the individual. He hated the rugged individualism of Americans. They had to get rid of that. And Carnegie very deeply involved in that. They even talk about getting rid of that, huh? And so I think that when you've been reduced to a member of the group, the collective, whether it's through sensitivity training that teachers have to go through, or whether, you know, it's in your own community, like we have a community-oriented policing system, you know, where they give you a medal if you do a good deed. Well, you know, you're part of the collective with the police.
I would say in the next 50 years, if large numbers of people don't become consciously resistant to the overall mind control exerted on society, we're going to see many more people who really truly resemble androids. People induce this themselves by looking out at the world and saying, it's too dangerous for me to tell the truth or to say what I really believe or express how I really feel. It's much better if I fabricate a completely synthetic personality that's going to sit back here and remain passive. That's how it works.
The idea of short-term gain, basically giving up freedoms. Giving up freedoms is never a good idea.
Since the dawn of time, small groups of human beings have instilled artificial circular limitations on the minds of their subjects through the procession of history. Traditionally, the limitations are imprinted on the servile population through a cunning use of language, instruction, and media for the purposes of conquest, social cohesion, and authoritative order by harnessing the human resources of the broad population. Human history reflects countless stories, regardless of what era you happen to live in, and the common thread throughout these stories is that of the struggle between the state, whatever its form, and the individual, the goal of which is to harness and subsume the individual, willingly or unwillingly, into its group collective.
The role of authority is a predatory system that sees the individual basically as a unit of energy. The first forms of mind control go back to prehistory. And you would simply have a priest class that developed technologies of herbs and medicine and had a value to the tribe. But pretty soon the priest class would start studying the sky and when there were solar and lunar eclipses, and would say, hey, the sun's not going to come back on this date unless you make me king or unless you give me total control. And the people would say, okay, we saw the eclipse when you said it was coming. You know, the snake god ate the sun of the moon. What do you want? I want your firstborn child. Sacrifice him to me. Every culture does that. Every culture at one time or another demands human sacrifice because that's the state or the priest class demanding absolute, total fealty and submission to it.
Mind control has existed since the dawn of time. Only the methods have changed. Elites have always known, if I can control the minds of my people, I control them. Only the technology has changed. It's still the same program. It's never stopped.
Sun Tzu, within the works of The Art of War, talk about the fact if you can understand your enemy so well to the level of where you can psych him out, basically defeat him before you put one boot on the battlefield, you've become a true master of your domain.
The Greek author Plato embedded several key characteristics of ruling groups in his monumental work known as The Republic. Therein, he introduces the term cybernetics as a description of steering the ship of state, emphasizing crowd control. Plato memorialized the essence of the scenario used to control individuals to this day, to make them part of the group or state. This is famously known as the allegory of the cave, a useful strategy which is emblematic of the history of mind control.
The idea of cybernetics first shows up in Plato's Republic. I believe it's book 6, and in the Greek original text it's read kybernetes. But you can easily discern how this word tied into cybernetics, the control of not only nations, but how the making of individuals into the collective that forms nations came about.
As we've moved through history, every great leader has had to understand the potential of information, the potential of speech, the potential of words, the potential of books.
What is a citizen, if not someone willingly or unwillingly participating in the machinations of the state? How would we acquire the habits of citizenship without stimulus from the state and our response to it?
Attention! Attention! This is your beloved leader, Og the Exalted. There will be a special Giant Joy rally today at Og Memorial Stadium.
In an attempt to assist the state, a 14th century Italian named Niccolo Machiavelli crafted several books intended to help the ruling elite dominate their subjects with the most effective psychological warfare techniques available to the world at that time.
And he was trying to convert the Medici family into hiring him to provide political advice. Conspiracy is the story of history. It's the story of plunderers taking care of people who produce. They claim to take care of them through government, which doesn't give you anything, it doesn't take away first. So it's not creating something out of nothing. It's very real what they're doing. They're taking your rights or taking some people's rights and adding more to someone else's rights.
Concurrent to Machiavelli's efforts, the consequences of tyranny were sowing the seeds of liberty throughout Europe, with authors like Etienne de la Boétie of France leading individuals to consider their situations and discover effective means to achieving liberty for all.
So this whole idea of Machiavelli telling the ruling elite how to do this in a more efficient and effective manner without people directly knowing about it. But his mistake is that these books get out there and other people start to read these books because it's not just the ruling elite. This starts to have an influence in Europe. You've got a character named Etienne de la Boétie who writes a discourse on voluntary servitude. And basically what de la Boétie does is he shows you that everything that Machiavelli told the ruling elite about how to control you is undone when you understand it to the nuts and bolts level, where you can then withdraw your consent, and that only then are you free.
We control you. We control your mind. We make you believe you have no creative power. We make you forget you have imagination, which is the core capability from which you can invent your own reality.
The myriad components of collectivism combine to form a comprehensive system for transforming the individual into a cog within the machinery of the state. The first step is to remove self-reliance, thus creating dependence on the state or collective. The next step is to create a motivation based on fear of scarcity, as opposed to creativity and productivity. Remove the systems of autonomy, creativity, and self-teaching, which help create individuality in the first place, and the void is filled by the will of the collective. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the mind is no different. Innovative and enigmatic German philosopher of the 19th century, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, observed that human history could be manipulated to create a contrived outcome. Hegel's essential observations of the methods by which history may be authored by a small group translate into a world in which an individual's choices may be engineered away from his needs.
How to engineer the opinion of the American people so that they would fully endorse, not only endorse, but demand a war.
There's another one. Another plane just hit. Right, oh my God, another plane has just hit. It hit another building, flew right into the middle of it. Explosion.
So it's a problem, the people then beg for it, that's reaction, and then it's solution, which is centralizing more control.
Create the problem, people scream, you couldn't impose any solution you want on people.
One recent practical example of the use of Hegel's method for control is that of the infamous underwear bomber.
I'm Kurt Haskell. I'm a Michigan attorney, and I'm more well known as being the main eyewitness to the underwear bomber event on Christmas Day 2009. I saw two men approach the desk. One looked like a poor African man, or maybe late teenager, and one looked like a wealthier Indian-looking man who had on a tan suit. They were walking together, and I just thought they were a weird pair, and I was wondering why the two were together, and I listened to their conversation as they went up to the desk and talked to the airline worker. When they went up there, just the Indian man spoke, and he said, this man needs to get on the flight, but he doesn't have a passport. And then the airline worker said, well, he can't get on the flight without a passport. And then the Indian man kind of argued with her, saying, well, he's from Sudan, and we do this all the time.
The student from Nigeria smuggled explosives onto a flight in his underwear. Prosecutors staged a demonstration of what might have happened, but something went wrong. Abdul Muttalab's trousers burst into flames. Passengers and crew grabbed him. The plane landed safely.
A source has confirmed that Farouk Muttalab is the son of Alhaji Muttalab, former chairman of one of Nigeria's biggest, wealthiest and most respected banks, First Bank of Nigeria.
As soon as this happens, we see Mr. Chertoff all over the news and TV everywhere promoting these body scanning machines.
But there are a few things we could do to make things better. First, we could deploy the scanning machines that we currently are beginning to deploy in the U.S. that would give us the ability to see what someone has concealed underneath their clothing.
To meet agendas in conflict with the needs of individuals, the ruling class creates an artificial crisis to which the public reacts by begging for the ruling class to intervene. The ruling class then enjoys the plunder made possible by removing the self-reliance from individuals.
Good morning, everybody. Today's hearing is the third in a series of subcommittee hearings focused on some of the causes and consequences of the 2008 financial crisis, a man-made economic assault on our country that is still foreclosing on homes, shuttering businesses, and driving unemployment.
The combined philosophies of Thomas Malthus, Charles Darwin, and Herbert Spencer led to the development of social Darwinism. Social Darwinism grafted the concept of the survival of the fittest onto the larger social framework. Claims of biological advantages or superiority could then be advanced as justification for future economic policy relating to the poor, and as the basis of Francis Galton's pseudoscience of eugenics in the 20th century.
So Darwin comes along about 150 years ago and comes out with his theories on where life comes from, and then it's survival of the fittest, and that the best organisms are able to survive in a competitive environment and move forward in the evolutionary chain. And whether that theory is correct or partially correct or totally wrong is a side issue. The robber barons, the British royalty, the J.P. Morgans of the world publicly adopted the idea of Darwinism and merged it with predatory eugenics.
And the eugenicists, who have always been looking for scientific causes to justify their sinning, if you will, that's what they found so useful in Darwin's work, is they said, we've already had this belief system that we're better than you, but we now have science to back it up.
Our entire current civilization, what we know as globalism, the New World Order, is based on eugenics scientists that developed their theories in the last 200 years, mainly in England, Germany, and the United States. The entire science of genetics, biometrics, eugenics, computers, all of it came out of the search for a system of total control over humanity.
So the issue with eugenics is it claims to be a science of self-adaptation for human species. So it sounds like a great thing if you're an individual. You want to make yourself better. If you reproduce, you want your kids to be strong and survive. However, the people who are doing it are taking and making a bunch of decisions for other people and violating volition and their free will all over the place because that's their modus operandi.
In his 1928 book, The Open Conspiracy, former British psychological warfare expert H.G. Wells wrote, "The political world of the open conspiracy must weaken, efface, incorporate, and supersede existing governments. The character of the open conspiracy will then be plainly displayed. It will be a world religion. This large, loose, assimilatory mass of groups and societies will definitely and obviously attempt to swallow up the entire population of the world and become a new human community. The immediate task before all people, a planned world state, is appearing as 1,000 points of light, but generations of propaganda and education may have to precede it."
The government of England put massive funding towards the study of humans, and not just medicine, but human behavior. And so all the sciences that the British Empire used on countries that it was attacking and regions it was conquering were also turned inward against their own populations.
In 1948, Eric Blair, the British journalist and author who assumed the nom de plume of George Orwell, wrote the iconic dystopian novel 1984. In it, Orwell outlined a collectivist future governed by technocrats, in which a Big Brother totalitarian state maintains control of society through constant panopticon-inspired surveillance, fueled by a perpetual war and emboldened by both covert and overt forms of mind control and mass persuasion.
The premise of the panopticon, it was an architectural design that was set up to maximize the power of surveillance. So if the prisoners didn't know, they could never tell if they were actually being watched at any one time, so they would have to assume that they were always being watched.
Through 1984, Orwell introduced the concept of newspeak into popular culture, a debased language structure that would suppress the ability of the masses to upset the power of the state by regulating their thoughts through an illusory police force known as the thought police. Orwell's notion of doublespeak demonstrated the cognitive dissonance inherent in tyrannical structures. As the meanings of the words change, the meaning in society is lost.
And fortunately, we have been able to raise our standard of living without sacrificing the spiritual side of life, which means so much to the American family.
Thomas Henry Huxley, the man known as